From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
22 days to the election, and polls show a presidential race that is tightening in swing states like Pennsylvania, where both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are stumping today. We'll be joined by Pennsylvania Congressman Brendan Boyle, ranking member on the House Budget Committee.
And we'll turn to the swing state of Wisconsin later this hour for a conversation with Republican Senate candidate Eric Hovde in a race the Cook Political Report has re-rated as a toss-up. We'll talk issues in a contest that could determine control of the Senate.
And we'll talk strategy with our signature political panel as the Harris camp rolls out new initiatives aimed at young black men, and the Trump campaign centers its closing argument around immigration. So 3 weeks from tomorrow is when voters will head to the polls, of course, if they aren't already voting early, Joe. And when we woke up this morning, it felt that end result after November 5th may be a little bit harder to call than previously thought, or perhaps even shifting in the direction of Donald Trump.
A lot of people seem to feel a different feeling this morning following a boatload of polling data from over the weekend. And I think a realization, Kaylee, to your point, that we are now at the 3-week mark here. I talked about that phenomenon earlier today on the early edition of Balance of Power with Cliff Young from Ipsos Polling. Here's what he said.
There's a new normal. And what we can say is that whether it's at the national level or at the state level, there has been a narrowing, ever so slightly. A point here, a half a point there. That's all it takes, right? But there is a concernable and real trend towards Donald Trump. And ultimately, I would make the argument that he right now is winning the framing war over the economy.
And he, right now, is preparing to have a town hall in Pennsylvania where Kamala Harris is also campaigning this evening. So joining us now for more is Bloomberg government's Jonathan Tamari, who knows the state of Pennsylvania intimately well. So, Jonathan, obviously we know this is going to be one of the most competitive battlegrounds. It also could be critical to ultimately winning the Electoral College. Where exactly does the race stand in a state that their candidates are spending a lot of their time this week?
Yeah, most polling has Harris up by the narrowest of margins, maybe 1 to 2 points. So within the margin of error, essentially, it could go either way. With the margin of error, it's arguable that Donald Trump actually has the lead. You could ask me this question every day from now until November 5th, and I think the answer will be the same. Either candidate could really plausibly win it. A small shift at any point right up to Election Day could really change the outcome.
Well, you start wondering what causes one campaign or the other to break out, if anything. They're both still laying out new policy proposals. Today, Kamala Harris aiming a series of proposals at young black men with business incentives, an effort to legalize cannabis on the federal level. Donald Trump continues to introduce tax deductions. They all lead us back to the economy, though, and that is the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and the economy is something that has been the top issue throughout this campaign. There's a lot of frustration still from a lot of voters about inflation, even though some of those numbers have come down more recently. They remember those early years of the Biden administration. And that's why both candidates are trying to make those working class appeals and trying to chip away, where Trump is trying to win some of those working class black and Latino voters who maybe were Democrats in the past. Harris trying to win back some of the white working class voters who have been part of the Trump base, because, as we just said, a tiny shift in any group could really make the difference.
Well, as we consider working class voters, obviously there are large populations in the Rust Belt, in the Blue Wall specifically, where it does seem Harris is targeting more of her energy, at least this week. For all of the conversation we had in the nascent days of her candidacy, which arguably we're still in, Jonathan, there was talk of an expanded map, include the Sun Belt potentially she could be competitive in. Are we reverting now?
I think the most straightforward path for Joe Biden and for Kamala Harris is winning Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Those are 3 states that have always been close but traditionally voted Democratic. Arizona looks tough for Democrats. Georgia has only recently become competitive. North Carolina, they haven't won since Obama. So those are the 3 states that are the most kind of straightforward path. If she wins those, she doesn't need anything else, provided nothing else flips. And so that's the most logical path. And it appears to be the way that she's going to be most efficient.
A couple of important events on the campaign trail, as we were just showing our viewers on Bloomberg TV. Tomorrow, Donald Trump, high noon interview right here on Bloomberg TV and radio with our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite. Wednesday, Kamala Harris sitting down for an interview with Bret Baier on Fox News. These are two important conversations that we'll be following closely, and we'll invite you to our special coverage tomorrow. Starts 11:30 Eastern Time as we walk up to the interview with Donald Trump. Now, we want to turn to the Middle East, another important story we're following today with some updates. The Pentagon announcing the U.S. is sending more troops now, almost 100, along with an advanced missile defense system to Israel to help protect from attacks coming from Iran. This comes as Israel has yet to retaliate for the barrage of missiles that Iran fired earlier this month. We spoke earlier today with former NSC official Hagar Shamali on the early edition of Balance of Power.
It is something that is meant to beef up that security, to definitely send a message across the Middle East that the U.S. is going to defend Israel, is going to stand and support Israel, in case of any kind of attack. But it certainly indicates that they are expecting something and they want to be there just in case.
We're joined now by Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko at the table with us in Washington. Michelle, we've had a couple of updates, not only that missile defense battery, I should say, on its way to Israel with dozens of Americans who will be there to run it. But Benjamin Netanyahu, according to the Washington Post, now saying that Israel will strike the Iran military when it responds. We're not sure when that happens. And that's as opposed to oil installations or nuclear facilities. Mm-hmm. Does the Biden administration then, in fact, have some influence after all?
I mean, I think it's a stretch first to, we don't know if these are verified reports. We have to, take a look ourselves. But, and there's constantly all these, rumors flying about the private deliberations between the two leaders and the fraught relationship that they have. So that is tentative. If true, yes, that's, somewhat of a relief, I would say, for U.S. officials that were pressing that both privately and of course, as we heard from Biden in public, much to the dismay of some Israeli officials who didn't want to be instructed on how to conduct this retaliation. So it does, I think, relieve a little bit of pressure, but I think we have to be reminded that this isn't, everything is all good between the two powers. They're allies. The U.S. is at pains to continue to say, this is all for Israel's defense. As you heard from Hagar Shamali, this is to send a message in addition to actually provide the resources needed to finish this war. But, there will still be disagreements, and I think the U.S. has been honest about that even in public, that, they don't always agree and they're being candid with each other, which the subtext is, this isn't a great relationship, a warming of ties, but it is something that both sides want to move forward and finish this off.
Well, we certainly have seen a market reaction to the reporting from the Washington Post. Oil futures are down more than 4% right now. WTI lower by nearly 5 full percentage points, south of $72 a barrel once again. So when we consider the political impact here for the Biden administration, why they had been encouraging a less escalatory move from Israel, not going after energy or nuclear sites, for example, it was because of concern about how Iran could respond and disrupt potentially global energy markets, right? Or at least a factor. And
stability has been the name of the game since, a year ago when the October 7th attacks happened. The U.S. desperately just wants to bring down the temperature, and in any way we can on all of these fronts. Of course, we've got Hezbollah with defeat of Hamas, all, in the balance now. Oil is a significant portion of this story. And you can see, as you mentioned, the market reaction underscores just how sensitive these conversations are about how Israel retaliates, even if the U.S. continues to say it's justified.
Yeah. All right, Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Now, coming up, as we've mentioned, both presidential candidates are zeroing in on Pennsylvania with campaign appearances tonight. We'll have more on the state of the race there with Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We will invest in the industries that, for example, made Pittsburgh the Steel City by offering tax credits for expanding good union jobs in steel and iron and manufacturing communities.
I could be in a beautiful beach I could be at a gorgeous beach somewhere in the world. Instead, I'm here with you in Pennsylvania, and I'd rather be doing that.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris campaigning recently in the critical battleground of Pennsylvania. They'll both be holding events in the state again tonight, with the presidential race there in a statistical dead heat. Joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is a representative from Pennsylvania, Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle. Great to see you, sir. I'd like to ask you, frankly, to just call it how you see it. How tight is this race in your state?
Well, first, I have to say, I always do enjoy when Donald Trump reminds the audience how much he would rather be somewhere else than being with him or being with his crowd in Detroit or somewhere in Pennsylvania. But I will say it's always sunny here in Philadelphia. I happen to be proud to be born and raised and live here in the Commonwealth of PA, the Keystone State, and I think the state that will determine the next president of the United States, just as it did in both 2016 and 2020. For this election, it is incredibly close. I think it's a one-point race. If the election were held today, I think Kamala Harris would win by that 1 point. But that said, it could still go either way, which in many ways is probably, for all of the things that have happened this year, the fact that Pennsylvania is a one-point race and could still go either way is probably the least surprising.
Boy, a one-point race. And so you wonder what it is that either causes one of these candidates to break out or maintain, I guess, a one-point lead. I spoke with one of your old colleagues from Capitol Hill, Pat Toomey, former senator of Pennsylvania. And here's what he had to say about the issues, in fact, the key to winning your state, Pennsylvania, this November. Here's what he said.
I don't think it's a single issue, probably. It's not one of the giveaways that Kamala Harris is promising, or, for that matter, some of the pandering that Donald Trump has done. I think the economic issue is a sort of broad gut check. Do you feel like you're better off than you were several years ago? Personally, I think it's still advantage Republican.
So obviously you guys don't see eye to eye on that, and that's not a big shocker, Congressman. The former senator pointed to the economy, kind of a broad issue here. And I find the closing arguments that we're hearing now really interesting. Donald Trump is going for the border, hard on immigration in every speech. That's how he answers most every question, no matter what issue it starts with. Kamala Harris, as we heard earlier in the program, is calling on Trump to release his health records, sit for a 60 Minutes interview, and do another debate. She's talking about how his staff is hiding him away. Is that the most effective closing argument for this campaign? Or does Kamala Harris need to keep hammering away on the economy?
Well, you know, I do think that for a certain group of voters who have deep economic concerns because they were badly impacted by first the pandemic and then the global spike in inflation that happened in 2021 has taken a while to unwind. I think for that segment of the population, the economy will still be front of mind. But there are also two other main sort of buckets of issues that will determine the votes of a whole lot of people. And that is, first, the cultural issues, whether it's abortion and I would include immigration in there as well. I mean, the reality is there are a lot of people in Pennsylvania as well as the United States today who are not voting, frankly, in strict accordance with what might be in their economic self-interest because of their deep concern of those cultural issues. And then there's another bucket of issues that I would call the democracy issues. And these are directly about Donald Trump. And frankly, Pat Toomey, who even though he's on the other side of the aisle, he and I always worked well together. He, Liz Cheney, others are perhaps examples of the kind of Republicans who live in and around either southeastern Pennsylvania or nearby, who, if you had a more normal Republican presidential nominee, might be inclined to vote Republican, but who just can't bring themselves to put someone like Donald Trump back in the Oval Office out of fear of what Donald Trump would do. I mean, this is a man, after all, who incited an insurrection that injured more than 140 Capitol Police officers on January 6th. And his sort of rhetoric that he's talking about during this campaign only brings back the sort of fears that he would even be worse the second time around. So, yes, the economy will matter. It'll be important for a certain group of voters. But I wouldn't say that it's the only issue or even now the major issue. There are those other buckets of issues out there as well that will determine the minds of a lot of voters.
Well, Congressman, the Harris campaign has said at her rally this evening in Erie, Pennsylvania, the vice president plans to ratchet up warnings about the risk a second Donald Trump term poses to the American people if he returns to power. So perhaps leaning more on that other issue you mentioned. When we consider that, though, especially when we consider what happened in Pennsylvania in 2020, it took several days to get the results. At one point, Donald Trump was calling for the stopping of the count when he was winning. Not all the mail-in ballots had been counted because you can't start that in your state until the morning of Election Day. How concerned are you, sir, about how long it could take for us to know definitively who won?
Yeah, so first, let's just be clear about the situation in Pennsylvania. We are prohibited, unlike Florida, unlike North Carolina, unlike almost every state that is early voting, uniquely in Pennsylvania, our Republican-controlled legislature prevents us from doing what's called pre-canvassing of mail-in ballots. That means that process in Pennsylvania can only begin on Election Day. That is what leads to the long delays. It was compounded by the fact that in 2020, of course, we were still in the middle of the pandemic, so many people voted by mail, myself included, really for the first time. Now, the good news is that in 2024, the pandemic is over. There shouldn't be nearly as many people voting by mail this time as there were last time. But all that having been said, I have no doubt that come 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, Republicans will be winning this election in Pennsylvania, but it will be the red mirage because Democrats tend in much bigger numbers to vote by mail over Republicans. Those ballots, while they won't take 3 or 4 days to count this time, I still do think it will take a full day for all of the votes by mail to be counted. So this is an entirely avoidable situation. It was created by the Republican legislature, and it will unfortunately empower Donald Trump to pretend like there's something nefarious going on when there really isn't.
Do you expect ticket splitting to be a phenomenon in Pennsylvania, Congressman? And I ask you that because Senator Bob Casey is looking like he's headed for a win, at least if the election were held today, even if it were by a couple of percentage points here. If Bob Casey wins the race for Senate, does that mean Kamala Harris won Pennsylvania?
So first, I mean, I do expect Senator Casey to be reelected. I think he'll run probably a few points ahead of where the presidential ticket is. I would point out, at the risk of sounding like I'm bragging, ticket splitting also happens in my congressional district. I ran 5 points ahead of the top of the ticket in my congressional district. So there's all sorts of ticket splitting that still happens in Pennsylvania. I'm right next to Bucks County, where Joe Biden won it by 6 points last election. And then the folks there turn around and voted for a Republican for Congress. So it still happens in our state, probably more than most other swing states. And I fully expect that you'll see all those sorts of splits again this November.
Well, we heard something important in this conversation. Remember, we heard Congressman Boyle tell us it will likely take a full day for all of the ballots to be counted and for the race to be called in Pennsylvania. The Democrat from Pennsylvania, Brendan Boyle, it's good to see you, sir. Welcome back to Bloomberg. Coming up, we'll have a look at the odds, the so-called Trump trade this November, how Wall Street is looking at this race with 3 weeks to go. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. We're glad you joined us. The so-called Trump trade is back, and the Goldman Sachs trading desk says a basket of stocks exposed to Donald Trump policies can jump as much as 8% with a Trump win. For more on how investors are positioning themselves, no matter the outcome here, joining us, Natalia Kniazhevich is with us. Natalia, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so we see that Goldman Sachs trading desk is basically saying, yes, investors were trading around U.S. presidential election this summer. Then the trade lost its steam. Now it's coming back and clearly in favor of stocks that are supposed to benefit from Donald Trump policies. For the first time since mid-July, Goldman Sachs Republican outperformers basket is now trading higher versus Democratic outperformers basket. And we see more activity in this space. As you mentioned, they expect a huge jump if Donald Trump gets reelected. And a couple of days earlier, we also heard from UBS trading desk. They told clients buy financial stocks and get downside exposure to Chinese stocks.
So as we consider the guide of history here, Natalia, the way the market is behaving now, almost 3 weeks out, or nearly exactly 3 weeks out from this election, relative to history, what should we know about how people usually trade electoral cycles?
Right. So long-term portfolio managers, they don't typically trade elections, but we should keep an eye on the so-called fast money. I'm talking about hedge funds, of course. And usually they sell stocks before the U.S. election because those events provide more dislocation. They need to have more cash on hand ready so they can benefit if they go long or short. We saw that hedge funds were selling U.S. stocks starting from May, but historical data shows that positioning is still really elevated versus, again, historical levels. And until recently, we thought that they would keep selling stocks, but now the narrative has changed because there are so many factors right now to consider. We have the Federal Reserve policy, we have still strong earnings, we have economy. And for hedge funds, again, based on conversations I have with hedge fund watchers, it's really hard to fight this rally. So this election cycle is really different for all groups of investors.
We talk about the Trump trade, Natalia, in our remaining moment here. How about the Harris trade? I don't hear it mentioned quite as often, and it's a more difficult one to quantify when you get past solar stocks and some of the more obvious names. Is there a Harris trade?
It is, and it actually was quite in favor for quite some time. Again, like traders can trade but different ways, right? So one of the most obvious example is to look at baskets. And we have this, again, Goldman Sachs Democratic basket, and they have huge exposure to renewable energy stocks. They also have exposure to the so-called low-income stocks, such as low-income housing. Now today we hear Kamala Harris is getting more supportive for crypto stocks, and maybe after today, traders or trading desks will have to reposition and adjust baskets as well.
All right, Natalia, thank you. That's Bloomberg's Natalia Kniazhevich. Thank you so much. Now coming up, we'll take a closer look at one of the closest races down the ballot that we're following, the fight for Wisconsin's Senate seat. We'll be joined by the Republican candidate, Eric Hovde, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Wisconsin is probably the closest to an evenly split 50-50 state as we have in the country. These races are just always close in Wisconsin. Our Swing State Project poll, which again found that Tammy Baldwin, the Democratic senator there, was ahead by 2 points, 49-47, over her Republican challenger. Since August, we had seen an 11-point shift among independents, along with a slight shift among Republicans toward Hovde.
That was Jessica Taylor of the Cook Political Report on Balance of Power last week, talking about the tightening race for the U.S. Senate seat in Wisconsin, a race that Cook has re-rated to toss-up from leans Democrat. Joining us now is the Republican challenger in that race, Eric Hovde. Mr. Hovde, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's good to see you. National Republicans smell opportunity here. They see the same tightening polls. The Senate Leadership Fund, which is allied with Mitch McConnell, just made a $17 million ad buy in your state on your behalf. A lot has been mentioned about your own personal wealth. I wonder if you see this new infusion of money making the difference.
Look, it's definitely helpful, but before that even happened, the race was tightening. The momentum has been on our side. The difference is I've been talking about issues, real issues, the economy, inflation, how that's impacted people's lives, our open border and all the problems that come from that, our broken healthcare system, affordable housing, issues that matter to people here in Wisconsin. Senator Baldwin has spent her whole time just running crazy attack ads, trying to burn me down and get people to hate me. And I think it's just kind of finally backfired because people want to know, how are you going to make their lives better?
Well, sir, as you raise some of the issues you're focused on, one of them that has prominence on your issues page on your campaign website is preventing a debt crisis. And in part, what is on there reads that debt hinders economic growth, creates financial vulnerabilities, and limits our ability to respond to future crises. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget has found in its median estimate, it thinks that the plans Donald Trump has put forward, if he is elected, could add $7.5 trillion to the deficit. If he wins and you win your seat and have a chance in the Senate to vote for things like tax policy, would you be supportive of everything that he's put forward? And if so, how do you justify the cost?
Look, the one area that I probably have said that President Trump and I will have different differences of agreement on if we are both elected will be around the debt. Look, it's probably one of the biggest reasons that drove me into it. Great civilizations fail always the same way, whether it was Rome, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the great empires that were in China. And that is they first lose their moral compass and then they bankrupt themselves. So we have $36 trillion in debt. The interest cost on our debt is $1 trillion a year. We're already in the beginnings of a debt crisis when we're at those levels. And it is the most serious issue we have to tackle. And look, it's largely a spending problem. As we all know, during the COVID lockdowns, they increased spending by 40%. Then the economy started reopening back up at the end of 2020, the beginning of 21. We should have pulled those spending levels back to pre-COVID levels. But instead, Joe Biden and the Democrats continued to spend even more. And so federal spending has gone up 50%. Now, our population didn't go up by 50%, but that's what they're spending. So, look, I've laid out a whole series of economic proposals, how to deal with the debt and how to get economic growth going. And that is a major issue for me.
Well, I wonder if there's such a thing as good deficits, Mr. Hovde, knowing that Donald Trump added over $7 trillion to the deficit in his first term. There's an argument underway right now in Washington about whether to extend or make permanent the Trump tax cuts. A lot of people think that is worth it and that the economy will grow out of the hole that's blown in the budget here. Where are you?
Look, let's be clear. The bulk of President Trump's deficits that you're talking about happened because we shut down the economy and we cratered the private sector, and we're doing transfer payments to individuals through stimulus checks and to businesses. Where under the Democrats, the economy was released and they continued to spend. Look,
so
I do believe that we need to extend the tax cuts for small and medium-sized businesses. They're really small businesses. They're the tax cuts for LLCs and Subchapter S corporations. Why? Because if we let their tax rates rise and big corporations that are largely structured in a C corporation continue to remain at a lower level, which was beneficial and obviously helped grow the economy, then it would be unfair to small businesses. So I do believe we need to create a level playing field because small businesses are the economic engine to our economy. And that's where most of the job creation starts, as small businesses start up and they go from small businesses to mid-sized businesses.
We'd like to turn, sir, to the issue of health care, because earlier this afternoon at an event with the Democratic vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, your opponent, Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin, had this to say about your thoughts on health care policy. Take a listen.
For you students, raise your hands if you are on your parents' health insurance. My opponent wants to overturn the Affordable Care Act And he called the provision that I authored to allow young people to stay on their parents' health insurance stupid. That's the stakes. Really, he did. Those are the stakes in this election.
So, sir, what health care policy would you pursue if you were elected to the United States Senate? And knowing that you yourself suffer from MS, I believe you were diagnosed at 27, and we're glad that you are feeling well. What do you make of some of the ideas that have been put forward by Kamala Harris, including providing Medicare coverage for people who need in-home health aides? Is that something you could get behind in a bipartisan manner?
Look, let's back up. First of all, President Obama, when he passed Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, said what? One, healthcare costs will slow down. Two, access to healthcare will increase. And three, you'll be able to keep your family doctor. Now let's look at the results, because in the world of business, results matter. Healthcare costs shot up even more aggressively. Access to care has continued to collapse and has gotten very severe, not only in certain areas of cities like I am in Madison, Wisconsin, but in rural communities. And the family doctor has all but disappeared. Look, I believe in pre-existing conditions, but there is so many changes that need to happen. I could get into it, but it would take a long time. But just to touch on a couple big ones, they allowed monopolies and oligarchies to be created. That makes absolutely no sense. Here I'm standing in Madison, Wisconsin. We allowed our biggest hospital provider, UW Health System, to buy our second biggest hospital provider, Meritor Health. They control over 60% of the healthcare market. Do you really think you're going to get price competition when one party controls over 60%? Of course not. Then they they put in a provision on the medical loss ratio. It'd take too long to get into it, but it had the exact reverse effect of driving health insurers not to push back down on health care costs, but let them run. What we need to do is bring free market solutions. We need to drive price transparency into our healthcare system. And there's so many things that need to be done. And if we don't get serious about this, our healthcare system is going to absolutely collapse, because I'm the last year of the baby boom generation. The first year is 78. And over the next 10 years, the biggest population bubble is going to be using healthcare at an accelerated pace. And our healthcare system is not structured right now to handle this increase of usage. So we better get serious on how to deal with this issue. Senator Baldwin knows nothing about it. She's never had to buy herself insurance because she's been on government health insurance her whole life. I've had to buy thousands of employees. I actually took one of my companies and self-insured and had to figure out all the complications, and I've kept my health care costs in that company flat for 5 years.
Well, look, we like answers, Eric, and it's great to hear a strong opinion on this as opposed to concepts of a plan, as Donald Trump said in the debate. We'd love to continue that conversation with you. In the time that we have remaining, though, I want to remind our listeners and viewers that this is not your first campaign for Senate. As we look back to your race in 2012, what did you learn by losing?
Look, I got into politics because I was very upset of seeing the housing bubble form. I used to be on your show all the time talking about this housing bubble that was coming. Then it obviously collapsed. I was appalled at the policy response, and that propelled me to run. I came close, got beat by a 4-time governor. But you learn a lot. You learn a lot about the political process. I thought I was done with this stuff because politics is ugly. And let me tell you, no matter how bad you think it is, it's 10 times uglier than you would imagine. But look, I thought I was done with it, but I got back into it because I love my country. I can't stand what I see happening to my country and on multiple different levels. So, yes, it was obviously helpful going through that experience once before.
All right, Eric Hovde, Republican candidate for Wisconsin Senate seat, thank you for joining us. And we also should note that we have invited his opponent, incumbent Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin, to join us here on Bloomberg, and we hope she does. Coming up, Kamala Harris is baiting Donald Trump about his health records after releasing her own. Our signature political panel weighs in next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
release his medical records. I've done it. Every other presidential candidate in modern era has done it. Here's the thing. It makes you wonder. Why does his staff want him to hide away?
That was Kamala Harris over the weekend talking about the release of Donald Trump's medical records. Then yesterday on NBC's Meet the Press, House Speaker Mike Johnson had this to say in response to the questions surrounding former President Trump's records. Take a listen.
Should Donald Trump release all of his medical records, Mr. Speaker?
He issued the records of his physicians. Kamala Harris issued her medical records as a diversion because she's desperate because she's sinking in the polls. Donald Trump's health is on display. Everyone in America can see it. The man works nonstop. He never quits. He probably sleeps 4 hours a night. He doesn't require as much sleep as the average person. He's an unusual figure.
An unusual figure. So on that note, we assemble our signature political panel. Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Unusual figure aside, Rick, if we consider the Harris campaign's focus on age here, knowing the issue of age was ripe during initial part of this cycle, Joe Biden left as a result of it. Became a non-issue. What do you make of trying to make it an issue again? Is it desperation, as the speaker suggested?
Yeah. First of all, for the record, I want the President of the United States, who has his finger on the nuclear button, to get 8 hours of good sleep a night.
That's not a bragging point?
That's not a bragging point. Yeah, look, I think he's the oldest candidate in the history of the United States, and will be the oldest president if elected. So, yeah, I think it's all game. Donald Trump used it incredibly effectively to help drive Joe Biden out of a race and really polluted the electorate to think that he can't function in office. So turnabout is fair play. And I think if I were Kamala Harris, I wouldn't be so cute about it. I would take out the 2x4 and start swinging. I mean, like, he's too old. You know, I mean, if you're going to say it, say it. Don't be cute about it. This is not something you want to beat around the bush on.
But, Jeannie, it's Donald Trump. It didn't matter 4 years ago. It didn't matter 4 years before that. Does he not get a pass on medical records and tax returns?
You know, he is, 4 years older than he was 4 years ago, Joe Matthew, as we all are. So, I do think age matters, and voters have been very, very clear on that. I think the problem, and I think her instinct is right here to raise it. Release your medical records. The problem is when she coupled that with the 60 Minutes interview, that threw me a bit, because where was Donald Trump while she was saying this? He was out doing a rally in Coachella in California. So I think she's got to talk about things that people see and feel viscerally. So he hasn't released his medical records. Where are they? Release them. You're the oldest candidate, as Rick said. But to say he's hiding from the press, I think most people would find that a bit head-scratching, because he's simply everywhere and consumes our lives for the last 8 years. That one falls, I think, on deaf ears.
Well, as we consider the Harris strategy here, Jeannie, we're obviously seeing a big focus on the blue wall states this week. She's in Pennsylvania tonight. Tomorrow she'll be in Michigan doing a virtual town hall or an audio town hall with Charlemagne the God. Then Wednesday, she'll be back in Pennsylvania on a Fox interview that will air with Brett Baer, then back to Wisconsin and Michigan at the tail end of this week. What do you make of the geographic strategy and the media strategy we're seeing from her in these final weeks?
Yeah, I think it reinforces the fact that, number one, whoever wins the presidency is by all likelihood going to win Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is a must-win for both campaigns. She knows that. You mentioned Fox News. She knows that a lot of these swing voters, undecided voters she needs to reach are never Trumpers or, people who supported Nikki Haley in the primary. She's going on there to reach them. And I think the fact is she's going to maintain her base in the blue wall this week. Charlemagne the God to reach out to African Americans, particularly men, because she needs the blue wall. She needs Pennsylvania, and she needs more support in the blacks, with the black population that watches Charlemagne the God or listens to Charlemagne the God. So that's where she's going to be. They are really doubling down in the areas geographically that she knows she has to win.
I just wonder, Rick, how much slack is left in this campaign? We're 3 weeks out tomorrow, and both candidates are still rolling out new proposals. Today, it's a multi-pronged approach from the Harris campaign to appeal to young black men, to the extent that Jeannie is talking about. 1 million small business loans, training and mentorship programs, health issues that disproportionately affect black men. Oh, and while we're at it, federally legalize marijuana. We've got 3 weeks left. Who's absorbing all this?
I don't know, but if I was a young black man, I'd be feeling pretty good about the price of my vote right now. I mean, everybody seems to be falling in line. Look, the reality is I don't think any of that matters. You don't have any time to burn it in. You're not going to be running ads in these swing states. And to be honest with you, I think the strategy of campaigning in the blue wall is great. But the amount of increase in vote that Donald Trump is showing in the young black male community is 1%, and it's even less in the blue wall states because there simply aren't that many African-American voters in the blue wall states. So the idea is to go there and talk about that seems to be completely missing the point. She's got a problem with white males, and that is a massive gap, and they've run from the Democratic Party. And even though she's doing incredibly well with white women, she's doing equally poorly with white men. She needs to go on Fox and have that conversation with young white men to get them to be back into the Democratic fold. They're leaving the Democratic Party for Donald Trump, and that's what she needs to stem.
Well, there's a lot to be said about the schedule ahead this week with regard to the constituencies that we're talking about. And coming up, as Election Day gets closer, we'll have a look at some of the tightest down-ballot races. We just talked about one with the Republican from Wisconsin. Our political panel has more with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The one area that I probably have said that President Trump and I will have differences of agreement on if we are both elected will be around the debt. Look, it's probably one of the biggest reasons that drove me into it. Great civilizations fail always the same way, whether it was Rome, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the great empires that were in China. And that is they first lose their moral compass and then they bankrupt themselves.
It's Eric Hovde, who we just introduced you to earlier this hour, the Republican candidate for Wisconsin's U.S. Senate seat. Earlier, we had this conversation, and back with us, our signature panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us here on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. Rick, I have to admit, I have not heard a single Republican candidate for Senate or, frankly, anywhere in Washington differ with Donald Trump when it comes to the matter of the deficit. Now, you've got a former businessman, real estate man in this particular case. How much of an outlier is Eric Hovde on this?
I think he's a complete outlier. I don't think, as you say, there's another Republican in or outside of Washington who would actually say, I disagree with Donald Trump's spending plans, future spending plans. And all I can say is that may bode well for Harris in Wisconsin because he's obviously looking at polling data that said Wisconsin voters don't like that idea either. Otherwise, he wouldn't be slitting his own wrist. And so, yeah, I think it's amazing that he would say that. It's totally different than what any other Republican's saying right now.
Well, and he's saying it with himself locked in a very close race that's getting closer with the incumbent Democrat, Jeannie, Tammy Baldwin. We're seeing close states for incumbent Democrats as well in other places. When we consider the Senate map, how nervous are you for your party?
We've always been nervous. The map has always looked bad for Democrats this time around, and we have known that. There are some really tough races out there, probably the toughest right now in Montana. And, of course, West Virginia, rather, is a loss. So, it has been a tough map for Democrats. But that said, we had the political piece out earlier today, which suggests that Republicans are now nervous about some of the seats. So I think Democrats feel like they can potentially keep the Senate, but it is always going to be a tough battle. And if they do, it is likely going to be, once again, by the slimmest of margins.
So we could still be looking at a very narrowly divided Senate either way, depending on how the math works out. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, thank you so much for joining us on this Monday edition of Balance of Power. And as we look forward to Tuesday, A programming note, former President Donald Trump will sit down with Bloomberg for an exclusive interview tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Joe and I will have special coverage for you beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and Rick and Jeannie will be along with us for that ride as well, as they focus on the number of economic policies Donald Trump has put forward, some of which we just discussed, including the debt and deficit.
Yeah, you better believe our signature panel will be on board. This is a big deal, an important conversation in the closing act of this campaign. Donald Trump with us tomorrow at high noon Eastern. We'll meet you then. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.